Hello and welcome to this IBTV spotlight on the rapid delivery of cellular therapies. I'm joined here today by Sean, Edwin and Shannon to discuss this and to be thinking about really how we can get cellular therapies to patients who just don't have the luxury of time. So to get started, discussions here at Advanced Therapies Week in Dallas this week have suggested that as many as 20% of patients eligible for cell therapies are actually dying while on the wait list due to manufacturing bottlenecks. What is contributing to these delays?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a shame that many patients don't have this kind of access that they need to the therapies that they need to save these kind of diseases that they have. The number one, I think, what we see on our side of the things is not having enough capacity to manufacture these drugs, both not locally where the patients are located or even at a centralized plant kind of concept. The other part, I think, is the administrative delays on getting approved for these kind of therapies. Getting the funding to fly to where these therapies are actually manufactured, kind of the administrative side of things, I think is a huge problem.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think actually, in a way, the 20% understates the magnitude of the challenge. 20% is the people that actually got onto the waitlist in the first place. If you actually look at the gap between the patients we could be serving and the patients we are serving, it's probably about a factor of 7, where 7 times as many patients could be served as being served today. And in a way, slightly perversely, because of the incredible progress in biology, that gap's getting wider and wider every year. So we've got this, I think it's really important. This is not a marginal problem that we can deal with over time. This is an urgent problem that needs sorting now, and I absolutely agree. It's about manufacturing capacity, and no more, no less. We've solved the biological challenge. We need to solve the challenges of getting therapies to patients. Exactly the same challenge we saw with things like COVID vaccines just a few years ago. That now we've got so good at biology. What's really important is that we can solve manufacturing, and we need to very quickly address those bottlenecks and get those therapies out there if we are going to help patients that can benefit from these therapies.
Yeah, bridging upon that, a lot of places that the patients are rural don't always have access to large cities to get to, and some of the major cities and major cancer centers. So, you know, kind of building on that, manufacturing in one area or even regionally is still not going to fit the void that Ed said that there's so many patients that just you know Tom Whitehead was down the hall this morning saying the same thing. He gets calls and they just can't make the 3-4 hour trip to get into that major center where, we've really got to solve some of that scalability issue.
Excellent, thank you. And Edwin, actually to your point, the eligible patient population for cell therapies continues to grow and is possibly beyond what our frame of reference is and beyond the statistics we actually have to hand. But how do manufacturing delays and the inability to rapidly scale directly impact patient outcomes, especially for those with life-threatening conditions?
I mean, it is a new modality we're working with, and actually, yeah, Shannon makes a good point. Is that we didn't used to have to think about where therapies were made and things like that in the past. It was all a very tried and tested route. And of course, these are different. They're individualized therapies, and so that brings both challenges in the manufacturing paradigm, but also in terms of the impact it has. It's enormous because it is a dose per patient. So the inability to manufacture that dose, firstly, can be a death sentence for these patients. But secondly, it's a time criticality to it. And that's something else. It's not just as simple as is that therapy there or not? Is that therapy available in the window that the patient can receive it? And this is an incredibly complex delivery. It's in the case of autologous therapies, we need to schedule the apheresis. We then need to schedule a manufacturing slot. We then need to get that back to the patient. We need to prep the patient in that interim. This is a whole lot more complicated than delivering chemotherapy. And so fundamentally, the impact of these things, unfortunately, is patients are dying. The biology is there to treat them, but we've not yet got the systems in place to be able to deliver the therapies and to save them.
And adding upon that, the manufacturing processes for all these therapies are all different, right? So the challenge is too, even if you were to, put the manufacturing processes alone. And we're not talking about the logistics for raw materials or the QA, QC, making sure that's standardized amongst the therapy, but then you have multiple therapies. So, there may be one for ALL, another one for sickle cell, all these things. So, not that the field is trying to standardize those, because we want to maintain the movement that we have in getting these therapies out and more trials, et cetera. But it's someday we will have to bring that world together and standardize some of these manufacturing processes, even amongst autologous, allogeneic and gene therapies. There's got to be a standardization in order to scale.
Yeah, and just to add to that, actually, is I think the standardization of the process parts, trying to do that in a way that's, I tend to think of it as standardization of the engineering that goes around as different to the standardization of the biology. I hate the idea of standardizing the biology. That to me is the route to limit the innovation that can happen in the biology. And I think if there's something the last 10 years have taught us is, from a biological point of view, we've become more and more capable. But I think absolutely we then need to standardize the things that deliver the biology. And I think we need to separate those two things out. Otherwise we create this limitation on what the therapist can do.
Yeah. And then, that engineering side of things, that equipment that goes into it, training that personnel, the technicians that are in the lab space to flexibly and quickly adapt to the different treatments and therapies effectively, efficiently, and with high quality is important.
Training is a huge gap in the field, as this conference is well aware of. And so, as other groups, whether it's a LabCorp, Quest, and some of these life science, just taking material, that's a challenge on its own. So to think to how you're going to do that at a scale for manufacturing and all these other pieces, we need to learn from those, from the things that they've done that they've been successful on, and bring those into our world.
Yeah, I think it's something that's often missed when you think about labor. We talk about there being too much labor, and we can cost that per hour, and we can kind of put that into a spreadsheet. But it's easy to miss out the fact that to get to the point you've got someone that can actually manufacture these therapies is months of training, and there's the back end of that, unfortunately, that again is often neglected. It's not train once and that person's then manufacturing therapies for the next 20 years. Unfortunately, we know in this space the average tenure in GMP is short by some numbers, maybe 18 months. Now, if you've got 6 months training, 12 to 18 months of useful actual productivity, it's unsustainable, it's unscalable like that. And that's unfortunately the bits that then fall outside, I think, of the bits that we often kind of see and can put into spreadsheets are often neglected. That training piece and the security of tenure piece, all of that really has to be factored in when you're thinking about the manufacture of these therapies.
But if we think about the speed of manufacturing, so if we take kind of labour outside of that, as you say, months and months and months of training required in order to get to that level, where else within the manufacturing kind of workflows, or let's think of kind of the system as a whole, where is the kind of opportunity for potentially innovation or for just accelerating that speed to get these therapies to patients? Like, is there a space that we can say, actually, there's somewhere ripe for innovation there to make this quicker?
Yeah, I would say just on the engineering side too, is the field has relied heavily on equipment, engineering processes that were very much biopharma based for MABs and CHO cultures. We've really, in the last 5 years, really kind of moved away to that, where technology innovators, to use to use the innovation point to that, are making better technologies. And so we've seen just in the last couple of years, specifically with the hematological cancers, they've been able to bring down the manufacturing process to 2 or 3 days. And we hope that rolls out into solid tumors and some other things. But really, as Ed said, the biology is the key to this. So we don't want to take away from, just to reduce the amount of time. We don't want to take away the efficacy of the product at the end of the day. So, what you'll see more in the next couple of years are technologies that are bringing in AI, machine learning, making more potent cells quicker. Whether that's through media, bioreactors, or whatever that is. And then that goes into, as we're making these new facilities, training for these new facilities, that we as a field make sure that the whole organization's our whole world is keeping up with those advancements, so that we can, one of the failures that we made 10 years ago really was, to Ed's point, we think it would be an easy tech transfer of this process from even one side of the pond to the other. And, it's all paperwork and raw materials. And it ended up being much more than anyone thought, and that adds time and the all the levels of intricacy in making some of these products, specifically in two different regulatory environments. We're getting better at it, and I think we can bring all those kind of into one world with one mission, and the mission needs to be, how do we treat more patients? Back to your first question, that needs to be the driving goal. If we're doing something else, then we're really missing it.
I mean, I think it's actually, I see a real positive that so far we've managed to get as far as we can, repurposing equipment that was never designed for this. So I think it's great that we actually now got tools that people are developing from the ground up for what we're trying to do now. And that is going to mean we can make big stride forwards in a whole load of things, including things like turnaround time. And the same applies actually to the processes we're developing, and how we're applying this. Is we're at the beginning. We've got still a lot of improvements to make, and absolutely, it's great that suddenly we're at a moment where we've got these new tools, AI, better analytics tools, and better ways to capture data to see these models. That means that we can start to make some really big strides forwards. And the final one, actually, I think, in terms of reducing that is, we're at the moment, because we're so labor heavy, we have got a huge amount of variability. And we talk about variability, an awful lot of that gets attributed to the fact it's a patient specific product. And yes, a chunk is, but any labor intensive process always ends up variable. So, coming from an automation background, is kind of the golden rules of automation are you do it for one of two reasons. You do it for capacity, which is actually the one we talk about most, but you also do it for quality. And it's that second one that I think, from the point of view of actually increasing how quickly we can get to patients, increasing the quality of the product we can produce. It's not necessarily changing the fundamental biology, but at the moment we've got a spread in there. If we can bring that spread down and critically bring it down to the leading edge, where at the moment we talk about maybe it's an 8 or a 9 day process. Of course, in development, people have said, well, it could have been maybe 5 or 6, but they don't go to market with that product because they need to take into account the fact that there is variation in there. Whereas the fact we can bring that down, we can now start taking that time out and giving it back and getting it back to the patients quicker, which again, we know is critical to improving outcomes.
And then, like, taking those strides technologically, we can improve, like, in process quality checks, final QC checks to release material faster. You mentioned AI and being able to, I guess, better project the results of like a clinical trial and how that process is working and developing currently. All of those things can get the drugs to the patient a lot faster.
I think one of the things we've not raised yet is surrounding logistics. We also haven't spoken really much to regulatory, but I think if we consider the kind of logistical bottlenecks that are really preventing that clinical delivery, where are we with the kind of logistical web of getting not just products out of the patient but back into them? I don't know if you want to start us off.
Yeah. We know it's a giant pain to be moving these materials from the apheresis center, the patient care center, to maybe a centralized plant to have that autologous therapy created. The cold chain logistics alone are extremely costly. Continued monitoring of that sample during transit, both to and from. You have the worst case scenario, your centralized plant goes down and has errors, tracking that material, pulling the material again if lost, all poses severe timeline risks to getting a therapy introduced to the patient in a timely fashion. If they miss their window, even worse, before we're having to restart.
Yeah, I think it's something that makes me slightly nervous, and my focus very much in what we do is typically within the clean room and improving the manufacturing. But I sit here a little nervous that we're making immense strides there really quickly, and I worry about a situation where, in the same way, I think we got caught a bit on the hop with the biology. Suddenly the biology is approved. We've got patients we can treat, and we didn't have the manufacturing in place to do it. I worry about, as an industry, that the next step is, okay, suddenly we've solved that bottleneck. We've got fully automated plants able to produce tens of thousands of batches a year. Okay, now we're suddenly pushing a lot more pressure onto supply chain. We've got a lot of raw materials moving. We've got patient materials moving. We've got consumables moving. It's pretty startling when you look at what it's going to take for some of these processing, and some of that you can resolve with having warehousing on site, but very quickly that could become a challenge in itself. And so I think we need to make sure that what we don't do is wait until we've solved the challenges of manufacturing, felt the pain more broadly before we start looking at acting on those solutions. I think it's really important over the next year, 18 months, we look to make big strides. And I know people are looking at it, but we've got to make sure we've got credible solutions in place. It's not the most complicated thing. I don't think we need new technologies there. It's something that I think we can look to other industries. I take up the progress things like home delivery from people like Amazon and grocers have done over the year. We've shown we can move kind of really complicated lot pulling around huge numbers of locations really, really efficiently. But we've had to do that. I mean, they've put an enormous amount of effort into thinking about how they distribute their warehousing, where they put facilities, what kind of vehicles they got moving between it. I'm not sure we've quite done the analysis yet in this space. I mean, it's really important if we're not going to suddenly see us push the challenge outside of the manufacturing space.
Yeah, and then the raw materials for a typical autologous or allogeneic drug product is some of those are liquid based. So just there's so much of a challenge with that. So what you see the pharmacy industries move towards is how can they formulate some of those on site on demand, and I think again that's probably something that the cell and gene therapy field should be focused on moving forward but so we're not, the worst thing that can happen is we don't have that raw material and we have a patient that's waiting on their product and they've already been treated, and for they've already gone through a depletion therapy and they're waiting on their product, and we don't have something simple in the manufacturing process, something we could have made on demand if we would have been ready.
A lot of the challenges that we've discussed today, we've referenced centralized models and decentralized as well. We've just been talking a little bit about in situ. Where are we with the conversation of decentralized manufacturing models, and where do we see that conversation going from 2020 to 25, but also beyond?
Yeah, I think in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more interest coming from both federal funded committees and agencies to more privately funded by the hospitals themselves that are interested in bringing that kind of therapy production to their site. Not only is it a huge way for them to bring additional patients to their areas, but to treat their local patient population. From a technology standpoint, I think we're in a really good position to start answering those calls, both from a facility standpoint, be able to place completely standalone clean rooms in their parking lots or integrated into their facility, to the equipment training and transfer from larger centralized clean rooms, as well as, kind of building up that equipment to answer and communicate the calls to a more, replaceable or scalable, flexible platform.
For me, I think in a way, over time, I've started to object a little bit to thinking of it either centralized or decentralized. I think that almost pitches one model against another. I think if I was to throw out another phrase, perhaps we need to think about optimized manufacture. And I think what we're going to learn is that that's probably going to be driven by the biology again. I think putting the biology right at the center. I think there's hugely compelling reasons to look at putting things close to patient, and whether that's in a hospital, whether that's within a city, I think that's where we've got to look at each individual biology and work out which is best, and particularly, obviously, the biological drivers, things like fresh product, and if that's going to be the step that's going to drive a potency improvement, if that's the thing that's going to drive us in being able to create a faster turnaround time because we've got better viability without the loss on both the freeze and the thaw. So I think let's look at the details and let's think about what is the optimal solution for the therapy. And I think there'll be a diversity actually, and I think that's one of the things that there's always a bit of a challenge. I think mostly in the past, we've always ended up quite a uniform solution, and one thing has kind of stood up head and shoulders above, and okay, we've gone down that route. I think that'd be a real shame in this industry. I think the opportunity we've got is to allow us to really be biology led, for the best biology to win, and I think if we're really going to harness the power of cell therapies, I think that's what the diversity will do. And I think then optimizing those models, and I love the idea of sort of flexible delivery and flexible manufacturing methods where we can look to think beyond centralized, which I think is a limitation a lot of what we do, and really choose the solution that is right for the biology.
Yeah, I think we need a successful example of where we can take a therapy and put it in a regional hospital that feeds community hospitals. there's a constant request from the community hospitals and, and those larger, if you want to call them regional, whatever they are, back to, using these different phrases, community hospitals are ripe for testing this theory. And whether it's TILs, whether it's sickle cell, CAR T, whatever it is, I think we need a couple of really good examples where they've been successful, where we put in all the things we've talked about, facility, training, standardization of processes, blah, 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 and show that it can be done and prove it to ourselves, but also prove it to the regulators. Because once we do that a couple of times, I think then the sky's the limit.
Absolutely. Well, that's all we actually have time for within the limits of this discussion. So thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.